Hey everyone, welcome back to the arena. I'm Mike David, joined by Matt Kovatchis, and once again a very special guest. If you're new here, welcome to our arena, a space in which we delve into deep conversations around people's life stories and all things health and wellness. These conversations are deep and are meant to inspire others to tap into their own vulnerabilities. I'll pass it over to Matt shortly to say hello and intro our guest. Before I do, it's love and appreciation to those who are listening. And if you know anyone who is not listening, do send this conversation their way if you think it could be of value. Over to you, Matt.
What's up, everybody? Like MD said, we got another special guest here, Sabrina Zohar. Sabrina is a dating coach, social media figure, amassed a following of greater than 1 million peeps. Yes, 1 million. And she is the podcast host of the Sabrina Zohar Show, which is a podcast on dating anxiety and doing the work to heal. So, Sabrina, first of all, thank you so much for being here. And second of all, why do you do what you do? All the things in the world you could do with your life, why this?
Oh, hi guys. I'm super excited. Thank you for having me. I honestly, my path was a little bit off the beaten. So I was in fashion. Like that was my background. I thought, okay, I'm going to die in my 6 feet coffin of like fucking designer shit. And I just always thought that that was my trajectory. And so I started my clothing line, software, and I just was like, okay, this is it. And I think over the years, like I started that in 2017, and it was after my mom went to the doctor with a headache, and they found 6 brain aneurysms, and they gave her like pretty much no chance of survival, and she defied the odds, and talk about a miracle, and she's okay. And so I had started my clothing company after that, and I started doing tons of podcasts and panels and events, and like really getting into the community, and realizing as a single girl at the time with so much anxiety, I didn't know what to do with it. Started to realize like there was a lot of parallels. I kind of kept always saying like, oh yeah, similar to in the career sector like this. And that's when I really started to realize like, oh shit, I'm not just anxious in my relationships. I also have this anxiety in my career and friendships. Like I started to just open up my eyes. And in 2022, I was supposed to do Shark Tank. And so I had spent 8 months. I was prepped. I was ready. Let's go. Like I'm on set. I'm fucking here. I could see the sharks. I'm like, I'm doing my fucking manifestation shit. This is it. And after 11 and a half hours, I'm on set, outfit steamed, go over the pitch one more time. We're okay, Sabrina, you're next. And they come in 30 minutes later and do the, I'm so sorry, we're not going to be able to fit you on today. You know, like we just got a little behind, but we'll find it and blah, blah. And I just went into like one of the darkest places I've been. And I just went home and I cried like I've never cried before. And just kind of was like, what the fuck am I going to do? And they dicked me around for a while. And long story short was like, I didn't get on. And at the time I was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. And so I was single. I was so tired of the clickbait and tired of all of the stuff I was seeing. So I started just creating content on TikTok just to create a community of other people that had anxiety, that were dating, that were really tired of hearing the bullshit, tired of the clickbait. And that just morphed. And then after that, my dog passed away a month later. And I really realized like, I really love what I do. I lost my best friend. At this point, I have nothing else to lose. Let me at least try doing something new. And I kind of just poured my life into this. I started the podcast 2 months later in January 2023. And now, not even 2 years later, here we fucking are. And so I think why I genuinely do this was because I was that person. I was the person with so much anxiety, so much just this fucking narrative that kept playing in my head that I'm too much, there's something wrong with me, no one's ever going to like me. And once I started to break through that, I started to realize other people also needed the help, and started to create a community that actually helps people and doesn't just shame or blame or give you nonsense of like, text this to get this. When it's like, I can give you a text that will get you a really great dick pic, but that's about it, right? Like there's not much else I can guarantee that you're going to get from somebody by texting them. And I think just having a new echo chamber has been really like, it's just something that I'm passionate about, because I wanted to break through the noise of all the stuff, frankly speaking, that wasn't helping me.
And so where do you think, for you personally, your anxiety as related to dating stem from? And then for someone more generally speaking, what does anxiety look like when it comes to dating? I think personally I have more of an anxious attachment style of anything, but just broadly speaking, how can people be more aware of what that looks like?
Totally. And I think it's a great question. What we see really is like, I think there's a common misconception. We think that anxiety has to look like overt, right? Everything being outward and big. But the reality is people with avoidant attachment style, people with any of the insecure attachment styles suffer from anxiety, because anxiety at its core is just a fear of the future, right? Like when we look at anxiety, it's actually a secondary emotion. The primary emotion under the anxiety is fear. So, okay, when we start to look at like, okay, what am I scared of, right? We start to unpack that. And for me personally, anxiety manifested in my relationships in very obvious ways. Like if somebody didn't text me for an hour, I would lose my shit. I would go bananas. I would have a panic attack. I would start to freak out. I would think there was something wrong. And essentially what it did was, when we think of anxiety, and like that's really a core belief, I learned that from my father. I had a narcissistic father, a people-pleasing mother. I had a brother with ADHD that was flying off the walls, that was sent to programs in schools. So there was no space for me and my sister. There was no space for us to have our identity. There was just, there wasn't an option. My father was very, very physically abusive. And so he would constantly hit us or leave or storm out. What did I learn? That messaging very young was, you're too much. There's something wrong with you. Just shut your mouth. Don't say anything. You're going to lose people if you have any kind of emotion. So, but okay, that might have kept me safe as a kid, but then let's think about our adult life, right? I didn't know how to set boundaries. If a guy texts me at 2 a.m. and said, come over, it didn't matter if I was sleeping, I'd get up, I would go over. I never said no. I didn't see my own value. I didn't have any worth. I self-abandoned. And I was so, when we think of anxiety, a lot of people, like you had said, with that anxious attachment, when we really look at that, it's a hyperfixation of other people, right? And so when we think of how does anxiety manifest, we look at emotionally unavailable people and think, oh, an avoidant, he just shuts down, or they just shut down, they go inward. They're emotionally unavailable. But so are people with high anxiety, because that anxious attachment, we're so hyper-focused on external, we're not actually looking at what's coming up for us. So that might look at over analyzing every text message, immediately going to worst case scenario. See, I knew they didn't like me. I knew they didn't want me. I knew I was too much. I did something wrong. And when we actually peel that back, it's like, well, wait a minute. Where did I learn that from? What are the core beliefs behind that? Oh, wait, I don't actually have any facts to back that up. This person was at work, right? When we really start to look at what's underneath the anxiety, it's fear. I'm scared they're going to leave me. I'm scared they're going to abandon me. I'm scared they're not going to like me for who I am. And that ends up driving the car. But at the end of the day, there's actually no facts to back that up. That's just shit that you learned when you were a kid.
And so, as you've learned more about your anxieties and started to really unpack that, I guess, is it, a sort of chicken and the egg scenario? Are you learning about this through relationship experience, or are you learning this more about yourself first, and then there's like a next level awareness in terms of how it projects or shows up in relationships? Like, what's the sequence there? Like, were relationships a mirror for you that heightened your awareness of your own self? Or, I see you nodding your head, but I think it'd be helpful to hear your thoughts on that.
Totally. I think to your point, it's like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? I think oftentimes, so we hurt in relationships, but we also heal in relationships. And I think the relationships are the catalyst to realize, hey, I think there's something wrong, right? Like, I could stay single forever. I could just be single and not triggered and have nobody bother me and everything's okay. And I think, no, I'm ready. And then the second I meet somebody and something doesn't go well, that's it. It's the end of the world and it's hell in a handbasket. So for me, at least personally, and like there's the two versions of me. There's the professional, like I work with people. So what do I see on that? And then there's the personal, right? My own experience. For me personally, it was my rock bottom. It was being with somebody that I thought was my end all be all. He was my father. I was with my father. He was an exact replica. They even fucking looked alike. It was creepy. And that really was the catalyst of, holy shit, there's something going on. I must be the common denominator, because it was the same thing happening over and over and over. So for a lot of people, it could be relationships or dating that trigger them to make them realize, like, oh, wait, I think this is me, or there's something going on. For other people, and like that could be when you're single. For other people, they realize 5 years into a relationship, oh shit, wow, I think my anxiety has been pushing my partner off. So I think it can come in either way, but I think what we really want to look at is pattern recognition and understanding, how do we keep showing up? What are we showing up as? And then what are the triggers, right? A trigger is just a cue to your nervous system that you're in danger. And so if we look and say, well, the trigger is my partner yells at me all the time, it's like, okay, well, yeah, then that means I don't feel safe with this person. Oh, wow, where did and then you start to understand your attachment style and go backwards. So I think it can happen either way. More often than not, though, it usually happens when you're single and you're dating, because those triggers are so fresh and they're hitting those wounds so deeply that it becomes almost, you kind of can't avoid it after a while when you're like, wow, 7 people in a row, the same thing happened.
So how do we identify our patterns? Because I think we all have our biases, and it can be very difficult without the support of maybe a friend or a therapist to recognize our patterns. And like I see people, friends specifically, I'm thinking about right now, Or like I've watched the same thing over and over with the same type of person happen over and over again. And so how can we become more aware to what our patterns might be?
We got to start asking what's the common denominator, right? So if like you have a friend and they're having all these and you're like, what's the common denominator? Well, every guy I meet's an asshole. And you're like, oh, so everybody else is the problem, but not you, right? Like, so it has nothing to do with you. It's just everyone else that you meet. So for me, it's like I had a client this morning and we were going over that and she said every single time, and she started saying, I said, okay, so what's the pattern here? And she said, well, I keep meeting these guys and then they fuck me over and all this. And I said, okay, so you don't want to take any accountability and ownership. That's the first step, is how can I take 100% radical accountability and ownership of my life, right? Life is not happening to me, it's happening for me. So if I can stop and say, I've had all these shitty dating experiences, what's my part in that? I didn't set boundaries. I allowed it. I didn't actually ask them deep questions. I said yes when I wanted to say no. It's like, okay, so that's why I'm going to continue to date the same people. And it's also a fun term Freud coined called repetition compulsion. Repetition compulsion, if you don't know, if you're not familiar, essentially means you're going to continue to date the parts of you that are unhealed, because there's a subconscious part that hopes if I meet someone like my father and I can get them to tell me that I'm not too much and I'm okay, then that makes everything else in the past that I've been through go away. But what ends up happening is it ends up just reaffirming that there's something wrong, because when you're going to go for people like your parents, right? When I dated narcissists and emotionally unavailable people, it didn't matter how incredible I was. I continued to hit my head up against the rock and wondered why it wasn't having any reaction besides me bleeding. And so that, I think, is a great place to start. If you start to notice, I keep having these interactions, I'm not getting what I want. Great. Put on one side of the list, what is it that I want in a relationship, and put on the other, what is it that I'm getting? Then start to understand what's my part in every dynamic. It's not about shame or blame, and that's the common misconception. I'm not blaming anybody, but I am saying to take accountability of your behavior.
I was going to say, so what's next? So now we've identified said pattern. We are all creatures of habit. And it can feel very uncomfortable to change, to do something different. So what's the next step? So I've recognized that I date emotionally unavailable men or women. And my role in that is, well, I'm choosing them or whatever it might be. They've recognized, they've taken some sort of accountability, but what's the next step?
So truly the next step after that is starting to understand, okay, because like what you're describing really beautifully is like, wait, I have the self-awareness, right? Great, self-awareness. I'm aware of it. Now what the fuck do I do with that? So it's a couple of things. One, we really want to start to focus on, well, what's happening in my body? What are the body sensations? Can I understand, oh wow, my chest starts to tighten every time this person calls. Okay, can I get curious, right? Like that would be my next step, is like getting really curious about, okay, well, wait a minute. And of course, like working with a therapist or a coach, like let me just go ahead and say this. I think way too many fucking people in the world right now don't actually want to do the work. They just want to listen to a bunch of free shit or ingest a bunch of stuff. They want to intellectualize and go, okay, well, I listened to every podcast and I read every book. Now why don't I feel better? It's like,
I just love that. So I love that. I could not agree more. I could not agree more.
There's not a real investment. Like I just paid $5,000 to work with a doctor for like this whole mold detox. I didn't do that because, I don't think I'm worth it. I did that because my ass is going to fucking do it. I'm going to show up. Because I'm investing in myself and I'm saying I am worth this. So I'm going to show up for myself in that way. And so I think that's the first thing, is like, you got to fucking invest in yourself. It's enough of, I'm just going to intellectualize everything and listen to every free resource. That's only going to get you so far, right? Like it's like trying to start a business with zero. It's like you need to invest money to make money. So you need to invest in yourself. So working with someone, it doesn't have to be an expensive person. You could go through your fucking insurance. Find somebody that will challenge your thoughts, that will call you on your shit, that's not going to coddle you, that will say, hey, are you sure about that? So that's kind of the first thing. Then after that, we have to understand our nervous system. What are the sensations in my body? Do I know how to regulate, or am I just in survival mode all day, running around as if there's a tiger chasing me, but I don't actually understand what's coming up for me? What are the thought processes and the patterns? Am I disrupting them, or am I spiraling and ruminating on my core belief, or am I interrupting the thought process and the patterns and trying to interject new ones, right? Am I creating neuroplasticity, or am I just on this loop trying to reaffirm that there's something wrong with me? Then we can go even deeper and start to say, have I done any inner child work? How do I talk to myself? Do I validate that I'm allowed to be upset, or do I call myself crazy and say I'm being dramatic? So it's really important. As you can see, there's a lot of places that we can go. Self-awareness is really beautiful. What are you going to do with that self-awareness? Because I want to know what's the implementation behind it, and not just, okay, I get it, I'm an asshole, but I keep doing it. It's like, so you're making a conscious choice.
So everything, like all of your dialogue right now screams self-help, and at the same time you're titled a relationship coach, and it's very clear that the methods and modalities that you help people with in their relationships starts from within. And I'm just curious, did you get into the self-help space first and then realize, oh, I can help a lot of people with relationships? Or was it your work on better understanding what makes relationships go round that you're like, wait a second, this connects back to self-help? I'm just curious, like, how you got from one to the other, because it's really interesting for you to talk so much about the self-development, self-help work, as you alluded to, and then how you apply that to relationships.
Totally. I think for me, though, what I started to realize was that it was reverse engineered, right? Everybody is so focused on like, here's how to get this relationship, here's how to do this. But what we're not realizing is like, all of that is a moot point if I don't show up how I want to show up, right? So like, I could bring you the Queen of Sheba. I could bring you everything that you say you want. She's coming down, right? If you're heterosexual norm, oh, she's on a platter. And you'll still go, she's a little too shiny for me. I don't want it today, right? Because if we don't do that inner work, it's going to be inner work for outer results. It's going to be really difficult to see your life change if you're consistently doing the same things. And so for me, I really see it as like you're coming home to yourself, right? Like you have to come back inwards in order to help the external. So how could I have a relationship with other people if I don't even have one with myself?
So then kind of like one layer deeper, because
Yep.
I think we see it in content all the time, and perhaps even in your content, there's this idea of like chasing the wrong person or staying with the wrong person. At one point you said like, just because you're thirsty, don't drink poison. I love that phrase. So how do we discern between, looking inward and pointing the finger at ourselves and being like, we're not showing up as the right person versus this person, and then there's maybe elements of judgment here, but being able to discern that this person on the exterior is not the right person for me.
I mean, I think that really starts with understanding yourself, right? Do I know what it is that I want, need, and desire? What are my non-negotiables? What are my boundaries? What am I willing to put up and not? What do I have to have, right? Like 80-20. Right, 80% of what I have to have and 20% that I can say, what's fine. That also goes into like when I met my partner, for instance, he is a little bit more avoidant. I have my anxiety, right? Match made in heaven. And when we first met, I was trying to discern between, is this person not for me or is this me creating narratives? And what I did was like, I had to sit with myself and say, okay, what are the issues? Well, I hate his car color. And I was like, okay, can that change? Yes. Okay. So then it's not a fundamental issue. I was shallow as fuck. Are his morals, ethos, and ethics, do they align? Do you guys want the same thing out of life? Do you see progress? Is this person growth minded? That's a huge thing in dating. We have to remember you're about to pick the most important aspect of your life, your partner. And we see people willy nilly after one date being like, well, I want to be with this person. And it's like, yo, if somebody walks by my house and says it's pretty, I don't throw the keys at them and say, come on in. So we also have to understand and know what's coming up for me, right? Like if I've, Matt, Mike, you and I are hypothetically dating in this scenario. Let's say we're going out and I'm feeling really triggered, right? And I'm trying to discern, is there something wrong with him or is he just really safe and I'm not used to that? I can't understand any of that until I understand, well, what are the triggers? What's happening in my body? What's the narrative? Is there facts to back this up? No. Okay, have I communicated that with this person? Yes. And when I communicated, they held so much space for me and they were really lovely. Okay, I've never experienced that. That feels uncomfortable. Oh, I'm uncomfortable because this person's really safe and I'm not used to that. Oh, I don't actually believe I'm worthy and deserving of that. You see how we can start to look, and I could have said, no, he has a Velcro wallet. I got the ick. And it's like, we're so easy and quick to be like, I don't want it because they do one thing I don't like. That's actually a protective mechanism because it allows me to not actually have to get more intimate and deeper with you. And I could just say there's something shallow and find one little thing that would set me off.
And you could argue it's protecting you from going inward and deeper with yourself, ultimately.
Exactly.
The ick. I think the ick is so funny. I have sisters, and I have sisters with friends, and some of these icks, and I know some of it's in good spirits. I know in some cases people are actually serious about it, and I think that's where it becomes an issue. But some of these icks are so funny. What is, in terms of how you describe what you do, your podcast, doing the work, what is it? Let's get what is the work? Because I love your point on, you can consume as much knowledge and listen to podcasts 24/7, read the books, but if you don't actually apply that, to me, everything that I've learned has been through experience, through my struggles, through the pain. Like, to me, that's where true wisdom is found. And so to you, in your opinion, like, what does the work consist of?
For me, really doing the work is like, am I holding myself accountable? Am I being honest and real with myself? Am I challenging my thoughts? Am I regulating my nervous system? Am I using positive and healthier coping mechanisms? Am I interjecting the loops that I have, right? Like, it sounds so, oh yeah, I do that. It's like most people don't, right? Most of the time what happens, we think we're good, and then you date someone, and I'll use a trigger that I'm sure most people can relate to, fucking texting, right? You think everything's great, and then all of a sudden the person that you're dating doesn't text you back. And then instead of, right, that right there, what is doing the work in this kind of scenario would mean? What we see more often is autopilot, right? That knee-jerk reaction of like, fuck this person and they don't like me, right? We start to create an entire narrative, and then we start to villainize them because if they're the bad guy, I didn't do anything wrong, right? And that can be a coping mechanism. Instead of doing the work in that way, and what it would actually be is implementing, right? Stopping and saying, whoa, okay, I just created a narrative around this person because I'm feeling really insecure within myself. What do I need right now? I need some water. I'm highly dysregulated. I need some sunshine. I'm going to go for a walk. I have no facts to back this up. I'm not going to villainize this person. I'm going to wait and to see what they say. Very different reactions, but you notice how if you haven't done any work on yourself, if you haven't gotten curious, if you haven't explored your triggers and your traumas and where did I learn this from? Wait a minute, this voice is my dad. This is not accurate. I don't need to listen to that right now. It's constantly choosing a new pathway. And when you look and say, it takes 300 repetitions to have your body remember a movement. So you need to do 300 bicep curls for your body to actually go, okay, I know how to fire this movement on. For neuroplasticity to go on a new neural pathway, you need to have that 3,000 repetitions. So most of us have not repeated things 3,000 times, right? Like we see this of like, okay, fine, I meditated and it didn't help me. It's like, okay, but did you meditate when you were dysregulated? Well, that's never going to help, because if there was a man with a gun, I'm not going to close my eyes and just go to a happy place. I'm going to think of survival, right? So it's like, what's my toolkit? What did I do in this moment? How did I go from feeling to fucked? Did I put any space in between? Because all it means is when we regulate our nervous system, it just means that we're coming back to now and we have agency and choice. That's all it means. It doesn't mean that you stop feeling it. Am I holding two conflicting thoughts? Am I allowed to say, do I allow myself to say, Mike is an amazing guy and he's been so lovely, but I also just don't think he's the right guy for me because of X, Y, and Z, right? Holding two conflicting thoughts that I might think you're amazing, but I can also say you're not for me. All of this culminates into how do I actually show up and do the work every day? I put one foot in front of the other, and that's the only way forward. I hold myself accountable. I take responsibility, and I don't fucking blame everybody else before I take ownership myself.
And so how can we stop idealizing people? I.e., like, I hear all the time, I know, but I see the potential in them, or but I know it can be good in spurts, and like they've got it. And I think so often we see potential that others don't yet see in themselves, and I think it can be very problematic, and people end up waiting around. And so I guess, what has been your experience around seeing that in terms of the people you coach? How do you coach people through it? Like, generally speaking, that idea of just like almost putting people on a pedestal and saying like, oh my gosh, like, but I see the potential, and I'm going to give them one more chance, and one more chance turns into another chance and another chance and another chance.
Oh, I love to challenge people because I'm like, okay, what does putting them on the pedestal mean about you? And usually it's like, oh, well, if I put them, I'm like, they're above me, right? Okay, so off the bat, it's like by putting somebody else on the pedestal, it allows you to be below them. So off the bat, we have a power dynamic that's not healthy. So that's the first thing, is like just that awareness of, oh shit, yeah, you're right, I'm below them then, okay? Second thing here is, let's make them a real person. Right? So every time I hear that, oh, they're so this, and I'm like, great, so they're so consistent. Yeah, they were consistent. I'm like, okay, so they're not consistent anymore. Well, what does consistency mean, right? I'll challenge back of, well, they were consistent for 2 weeks. Okay, but what's happened for the last month? Well, they haven't heard from him, and he only texts me at night, you up, but I know he could be great based on what facts, right? And it's really starting to untangle. I'll never forget it. I was obsessed with my ex. The guy that was like my dad. And the reason being was because him being up on that pedestal allowed me to say there was something wrong with me. By me saying he's the good guy, he didn't do anything, I'm the piece of shit, and I'm the reason this didn't work. And I'll never forget going to brunch with a friend, and she looked at me and goes, you need to take the shine off him. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she's like, you need to make him real. And that's when I started, and I was like, oh, he's not actually super thoughtful. Here's 12 things he did in the last month that really hurt me. Oh, I'm allowed to be hurt. right? And so when we put people on the pedestal, it's often as well limerence, right? I don't know if you've heard of the term, and limerence is like an obsession with somebody. And it's often a bunch of, essentially what ends up happening is your brain is having this neurochemical cocktail. And so when you meet somebody, the cortisol starts to spike, right? And so when cortisol spikes in our brain, all the other neurotransmitters naturally get depleted because cortisol being stress, your body is using everything it can to deal with the stress. So when we know that, then what ends up happening, the dopamine starts to kick up. Dopamine is a reward drug. So dopamine comes in anticipation of. Notice how every time we have a goal, when you reach the goal, it doesn't feel as good, and then you want the next goal and the next goal and the next goal. So if we look at what's the potential and what's this, it's like, oh, so you're chasing a feeling. You're chasing this high. I need them. Every time they text me, it's a reaffirmation. See, I am good enough. So what I see is low self-esteem. Okay, so then you don't actually love yourself. You don't believe in yourself. You don't trust yourself if you think that they're better than you. So you start to see how we can really start to poke in, but you got to be honest with yourself, because if you're going to live in the delusional la land, like I had one client actually tell me, go fuck yourself. Because and he started to cry, and he was like, I didn't mean it. And I was like, it's okay. I don't mind if you tell me to fuck off. Like, it doesn't insult me. I get it. This is hard shit. But he finally had to acknowledge this guy didn't treat me right. And it's like, yeah, that's really hard when all of your life you've had caregivers that you weren't allowed to say hurt you, and now you get to say that they did.
So I want to pivot to boundary setting and non-negotiables. First of all, let's just hear from you. At what point do you evolve to this, I guess, or up level to this point where you start to kind of put your foot down and set boundaries and set non-negotiables? And maybe what are some examples of like some of the generic ones that you say are maybe universally fundamental? Like, let's just start here, boundary 101. What are some of those that you work with your clients on? What do those look like?
Totally. We have to remember boundaries can feel really, really scary if you're not like me. I would get hit if I said anything. Like, you're not allowed to say no in my household. My father disowned me when I told him I didn't want to go away with him. Like, this was 2 years ago. So I totally understand that this was never taught to us. So if we're going to look at boundaries, right, I think, and I'm sure you fellas can understand what I mean, I think a lot of people misuse boundaries. Boundaries does not have anything to do with other people. So a boundary is not, like I saw it online. It said a boundary, it said for any guy I date, you're not allowed to talk to your ex. You're not allowed to go like her on social media. You're not allowed to do this. That's called boundaries. It's like, no, babe, that's called control. Boundaries do not have anything to do with other people. So for instance, if I, like, my friend's a brilliant neuropsychotherapist, her name is Britt Frank, and she would always use this example. If I came to you and said, okay, I want to go out on Friday, and you said, okay, I'll call you at 9. A boundary isn't, you're not allowed to call me at 9. That's not a boundary. I cannot control you. But what the boundary would be is, you're welcome to call me. I won't be answering past 9. Right? I am telling you what I am willing to put up with. Hi, could you please take your shoes off at the door? Somebody doesn't, hi, excuse me, I asked you to take your shoes off. I'm going to need you to leave the house. Right? I am asking, I need this for you in order for you to show up into my life. Boundaries don't keep people out. They protect what's in. So a really beautiful boundary to even understand, like non-negotiables. What are your morals, ethos, and ethics? Off the bat, right? Do you need is religion important? If not, that's okay. Is race, ethnicity, right? All of these things. For some people, it's a game changer. I had somebody say, I was dating somebody and they had to date someone of the same religion. Can we change that deal breaker? And I said, but that sounds like they're not willing to negotiate. So that's the epitome of a non-negotiable. Do you want children? Do you want to get married? Those are very basic non-negotiables, right? Like, I could meet someone that says 0. I had a vasectomy. I don't want it. Well, that's not going to change.
When should people be having those conversations?
I would suggest the earlier the better. It doesn't need to be like Spitfire, right? But like my first date, I met my partner and I asked him, I was like, so, what type of relationship are you interested in? Like, for me to show up, I'm building something. I was like, I don't do the casual thing. So if I'm spending time with you, it's because we're going towards something. If not, I don't need to waste my time. I asked him, how'd your last relationship end and what did it teach you about yourself? I don't give a fuck about her. I could give a shit. What I want to know is, do you call her crazy? Do you take accountability? Do you take any ownership of your part? Did you grow and learn from this? Do you have emotional bandwidth? To this day, every time people ask him, what did you like about Sabrina? The first thing he says is the question she asked me, because she showed up differently than every other girl. He was looking for that depth, and I came with that depth. I wasn't scared of being too much. Why would I be scared of you? If you don't want kids and I do, you're wasting my fucking time. So it's important, right? I see this. I'll have people write in and say, it's been 4 months and they just told me that they don't want kids. And it's like, what were you doing for 4 months? What were you talking about? I don't understand.
So, okay, I want to go like one step deeper with boundaries being non-negotiable, and I totally understand like the difference between something so black and white, like whether you want to have kids or not have kids. If it's something maybe less significant, let's go back to that, like, I'm not going to pick up at 9 p.m. Type of thing. How do we reconcile a boundary being non-negotiable with forgiveness?
Yeah. I think what we have to look at is boundaries can be flexible, right? And that's the thing is like that whole, like you said, don't call me. I'm not going to answer past 9. I might answer at 9:30 one night if I so happen to be up, right? So, okay, so it's a little flexible, right? Like, well, I don't go out past 6. Fine, for tonight, I'll go out past 6. It's a special occasion. We have to look at where is there, like, we want boundaries to remain flexible because you can change. Non-negotiables, on the other hand, I don't want to change the fact that I want children with every other person that I meet, right? Like, there are certain things that we have to look and say, marriage even, that could be something that changes, right? You could be flexible on that. But like I said, what the true non-negotiables come in of like, do you speak to me with respect? Do you hold space and allow me to express myself honestly? Do you create a safe space? That's a non-negotiable for me. If you yell at me, if you use your voice at a higher pitch, if you hit me, if you touch me, right? These are things that the second they happen, I'm out the door, because it's really important to know what's your limit, right? What is your absolute? Because otherwise people will take advantage of that. Boundaries can remain flexible because that's how I'm showing up and I'm saying that this works for me. Whereas non-negotiables, that's it, right? Like that's the end of the road. If I'm this religion and you're this and we know it won't work, then that's it. It's the end of the fucking road if that matters to me.
And so what I'm hearing is like you can part ways when that non-negotiable is intruded upon, and you can simultaneously, you can still forgive that person for the harm that they did.
Depending, right? Like if somebody, like let's say abuse, right? There's no space for it. Like I don't have any sympathy or empathy for a man that's going to touch a woman, right? Like I don't. That's, to me, it's a hard line. There's anything short of self-defense, and even that gets blurry, right? Like my partner's 6'5". There's no reason that should ever be crossed unless I have a knife or a gun, right? Then fine, you have to take control. But I think we can hold space. So like let's say, for instance, I'd be curious if there's a specific one. But if there's a non-negotiable of like marriage, right? If somebody says yes at first and then maybe 6 months in they realize, I don't want this, I'm sorry, I thought I did. We can also hold space that person's allowed to change their mind. They're a human, right? I can hold those two conflicting thoughts and say, I think you're amazing, but we're no longer compatible. Compatibility, it takes a lot more than love. It takes actual compatibility to be in a relationship. Again, do we have the same morals, ethos, and ethics? If you're a serial killer or a sociopath, I'm probably not going to be okay with it. But, if you're somebody that you left the sliding glass door open and it might annoy me, it's like I don't need to villainize that person.
And so part of boundaries is being able to first understand what our needs are. And so I think a lot of people were grown up like yourself and others to believe that like I shouldn't have needs and my needs aren't important. And so I think part of before we can get to the point of setting boundaries, unless we're going to do it in the way of by which, well, like the example that you gave where it's more artificial in nature, it's not really a true boundary of terms of like what do I need to feel secure, comfortable. How can people go about starting to like understand what that is for them?
My first question, what did you accept in your last relationship that you're no longer willing to? Right? That's even a great place to start of like, oh yeah, my last partner was really dismissive. I'm not looking to accept. That's how I did it. Every relationship I started going, okay, what did I not like about this? I didn't like that they dismissed me. I didn't like that they gaslit me. Okay. So then that means moving forward. What does that mean? I can say no, right? I'm allowed to say no. And that's even one of my friends, Dr. Jamie, she's a narcissist specialist. And she always said, you want to tell someone's a narcissist, cancel a plan. Something very simple. Say no. Just tell them no, I don't want to do that. You'll see how they'll fucking lose their shit or they'll freak out because they're high conflict personalities. It's very ego driven. So if they see a threat to their ego, that's it. How dare you tell me no? You don't get to tell. So what we want to look at is just even those basic understandings. What did I used to accept in relationships that I'm no longer willing to? For me, it was started too. What did I accept as a kid I'm no longer willing to? Inconsistency. Won't do it. The person I go to bed to is the person I wake up to. This hot and cold and 1 minute in, 1 minute out. I don't have patience for it. It fucks with my nervous system and I deserve better. But the only way I would be able to demand that is by acknowledging I deserve better and I'm allowed to acknowledge that.
And so how do we do that? I.e., how do we start choosing our own happiness and allowing ourselves to, like, how do we stop self-sabotaging? I think for so much of my life, I was in part sometimes unconsciously self-sabotaging and sometimes consciously. Like I knew ultimately what I needed to do in order to be at peace with myself, to live happily, but the idea of doing something new was just so overwhelming that I just stuck to what was normal, to what was comfortable. And so how do you help people understand that like it's your birthright to be lovable and compassionate and happy? Like how do you help people start to like overcome some of that self-sabotage?
It's a great question because self-sabotage is a great topic, right? And so off the bat, what we want to look at is we want to reframe self-sabotage, right? So self-sabotage, if we look at it, what it would mean, that would imply that sabotage means I am doing something intentionally to hurt myself. Well, I'm not doing this intentionally, right? Like I don't do this because I enjoy feeling like shit. What we look at is self-protection, right? Because so these behaviors are trying to protect you from something. My question would be, okay, what are they trying to protect you from? That's a great first place. Oh, okay, it's trying to protect me from getting hurt. Okay, well, wait, do I trust myself that no matter what, I'll be okay if I get hurt? Yeah, I do. Okay, well, how can I show up as that? How can I reaffirm to that little me, the little kid that doesn't believe that they're actually, because all of these protective mechanisms that you created started in childhood. Up until you're about 6 or 7, that's when your amygdala stopped growing, and your amygdala is responsible for fear and emotions. So if we know that that's the center hub that stopped growing when you're a kid, it's constantly the past is becoming the present. So what you're describing is when you get dysregulated, then you go into the protector mode, right? I need to protect myself. I have to keep myself safe. So I'm going to do the same behavior I've always done. So then what does that mean? That means I need to regulate my nervous system. And that could look like going for a walk. That could look like having a cup of tea. That could look like doing 20 jumping jacks or punching the air if I have a lot of energy and I need to move, right? I feel too anxious. So when we regulate, what that means is it's nervous system regulation means you're telling your body, I'm safe, there's no threat. And so when we can come back to I'm safe, there's no threat because I'm here and I've got myself, I've got my back, then I can say, well, what am I doing? Oh, I do have choice, right? That goes back to regulating your nervous system, comes back to having agency and choice. Then you can make the choice and say, I could respond how I always do, but my self-awareness is taught me that that's how I always go. And so now I'm putting a choice and I get to decide. I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to put my phone down for an hour. I will handle it after. And then when you do that, that's how you build confidence. Look, I didn't die. I'm alive. I'm okay. I can do it. And we expand our window of tolerance. Because typically for most people, when your window of tolerance is this big, every trigger sends you off, right? Everything is the end of the fucking world. But notice how if you do ice baths every day, if you start to do shit that's really uncomfortable, even controlled chaos like that, it pushes your boundaries and your limits. So your body is like, hey, you're good. You can handle this. You're like, oh, okay, I'm good.
Sabrina, your energy is like booming through the headphones right now, and there's a lot of color in your language, and you seem so like certain and secure and just booming with confidence. You come across as somebody who just clearly can set boundaries and be really comfortable with who they are, and I think I have to imagine, and you like I would love to hear it from you. It seems like when you did the work, the true Sabrina is kind of like broken out of some sort of shell of some sort. And I'm just curious, like, were there people who knew you long ago and know you now that have pointed out this like transformation in yourself? Because a lot of what we're talking about from a self-help point of view is you're going to have to go through transformations and divorce old you and become new you. And how did that transformation come to be? Because I can just imagine somebody watching this and being like, well, I would love to be like Sabrina. I can't be. Like, I don't have that same conviction and energy. But just speak a little bit to sort of that transformation for yourself.
Totally. My best friend actually wrote a letter in for me for the show, and I read it out loud, and I was like, I was mortified while I was doing that. And it was all about, she left me a fucking 7-minute voice note and it transcribed. And it was just all about how like I was a hot mess. And she was like, I would watch you cry. I would see you parade around the street. She was like, your anxiety was so high you couldn't sit still. And I think my entire life changed. My relationship with my parents is totally different. My family relationships are different. My career completely took a change. My companies, my relationship, my personal. You have to remember, if I'm shedding a version of myself, right? A version that I didn't agree with, the version that my dad convinced me of that I was, right? That I'm too much. There's something wrong with me. You're never going to be happy. You're too needy. You need to stop. Well, once I started to acknowledge and say, I'm not, right? I had to break through the version of myself that really believed that and start to say, but I don't think there's anything wrong with me. Every day I get trolls on the internet that attack me. That's cool. You're allowed to hate me. And you know what I can say to you? Get fucked. Because I finally have come and understood. My mama always said, you can please some of the people some of the time, but you can't please all of the people all the time. And I finally got really okay with disappointing people. I finally got okay with saying no, because if I say yes and I consistently do what other people want me to, I'm people pleasing and I'm self-abandoning, and then I'm burning out and I'm exhausted, and then I'm good to nobody, right? And so I think for me, the trajectory, like if you talk to anybody, no one recognizes me. Like they're all looking at me saying, who is this? And it's like, yeah, because I came home to myself. I stopped allowing other people to tell me who I was. And I finally acknowledge, sure, I might curse a lot. I might speak really fast. I might do all of these things. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me. That just means that there are people that love me and there are people that don't. That's cool. I don't focus on trying to convince people that don't like me to like me. I focus on the people that do, and I harness that. That meant saying goodbye to a ton of friendships. Right? Like over the years, I have lost so many friends. I have made the choice to say this no longer serves me. I don't need this anymore. I'm not growing here. I have new friendships, new circles, new things, because when you're okay and you allow your old shit to burn down, you can then rebuild yourself as the version you'd like to be with a more solid foundation.
Was that part ever scary too? Like, do you feel like that could be the point in which a lot of people get to and they turn back and go the other way? Because that seems like the scariest part to me, is really being okay with like becoming this new self and battling some of that outside noise that you might get in that process.
100% surrendering is really hard, right? Having faith and saying, like when my mom got sick, none of us, she had 13 doctors or 12 doctors across the country. She had 12 specialists and no one knew what they were going to do. They had no idea. They told her 3 to 5% chance of survival, death, paralysis, like even if good luck if you'll see ever again. But what did she say? Nope, that doesn't work for me. I don't know how. I'm going to be okay. And she believed it. She genuinely was like, I don't care. It's not I don't need to worry about how. They created a coil. It worked. And now she's fine. Right? Like when I lost my dog and I lost everything and I said goodbye to friends, I was fucking terrified. But I thought, what else do I have to lose? I've already hit my rock bottom. How much deeper can I go? Maybe for once I can actually believe that there is a world where I could be happy, or I could be fulfilled, or I could at the very least love myself. And I started to imagine, what did she look like? How did she act? How did she embody? How did she walk? How did she move? And I started to really sit and say, I believe that this is for me, and I believe that it exists, and I'm okay with losing what's along the way. Like 6 months ago, I lost the name of my podcast. I was fucking terrified. I remember having panic attacks, crying on the floor, but also knowing I've lost before, I'll lose again. That doesn't define who I am.
There's so much good in there, and for me, I've gone through something similar, and I think it can be really scary at first. But in my experience, the second you get any sort of support, or at least in my situation, when I got a little bit of support, I was like, heck, like feeling supported and accepted for exactly who you are. Like that's all I needed, because it's much easier and more freeing to live authentically. And once I got just that little nod of like, no, I actually like you just how you are. It's like, really? Okay, well, then I'm going to go do that, because I know the other route. The other route, I can try to fit into different boxes and try to be different types of people to different groups of people. I've done that. Been there, done that. It's exhausting. It never really made me feel good. And so once I had this different way of living that was like a life of authenticity, and it was met with some resistance, but also a lot of acceptance, I was like, I'll take that. I'll take that trade-off 10 times out of 10. And so I'd love for you to share, because I know for me personally, the ability to live more authentically has totally changed my life, but not only externally, but also internally, how I feel about myself, how I feel day to day, my energy, the way I show up in the world, the way I think, my thoughts, my beliefs, all of that has transformed. And so I'd love to hear from your perspective too. Obviously, externally, things have changed as well. Like a lot of the things you were saying resonated with me, my business, all sorts of stuff. But how do you feel internally in terms of your shift from who you used to be to who you are and who you're becoming?
Oh my God, I actually can live. Like I was so anxious most often in the day. I was on three kinds of medication. I would take Adderall every day just to escape. I would take Klonopin if I felt anxiety. I would take 3 naps a day. Like I was so anxiety driven, I couldn't sit still. I didn't know what that meant. And I was just fucking up my own life because I did all that. Then I'd wake up late the next morning and I would miss this and I couldn't hold a job down. And it was constantly me feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. And all I did was just keep living in that same shit. Whereas now, I don't have the body anxiety, and no, I don't take medication. I have no shame against anybody that does. You do whatever you want. But for me, I didn't actually need it. I needed to learn coping mechanisms. I now can say when something happens, like somebody gave me a shitty review the other day, and I was just like, okay. Right. And like that would never have happened. I would have lost it. I would have cried. I would have become a panic attack. It would have been a whole thing. And so now what I realize is like you start to understand like, oh, so this is the point of doing this. Every day life gets different. And that's really exciting because I look now when I get triggered, the first thing I think is like, okay, what can I learn from this and how can I grow? Because I see the importance of being growth minded and saying that like every single day I can become a better version of myself if I invest in myself. I know it's easier to stay in your shit, but actually then I would ask you, is it? Right? Like the client I was talking to earlier, she kept saying, well, but I've always done this. Isn't it easier? And I said, but aren't you tired? And she said, I've never been more exhausted. And I said, so then what else do you have to lose?
Man, so you brought up the medication piece, and I think at times it's a helpful crutch, and conventional medicine has a space in our world for sure. It's just so interesting to think about the type of agreement that you might make with a narrative, because I think medicine comes with a connotation that something's wrong with you. And it kind of further reinforces an agreement that you may have accepted. I'm bringing up agreements, by the way. Thanks, Matt, for recommending the 4 Agreements. An awesome
it's a great book.
I don't know. Hey, have you read it, Sabrina? Okay, great. I'm using agreement in that context. And a lot of what you talked about was having to break out of these agreements that you had really made based on narratives that had been deeply rooted and conditioned into you, you know, whether it was your father or just externally, et cetera. And I'm just curious, like, your own perspective on like having to really break that agreement in terms of, did you ever really identify with the medicine as like, oh, something is wrong with me? And what was that process like to break through that?
Honestly, the medicine was a crutch. I didn't want to do any work on myself. And I was like, no, just give me more. Just give me more. And I would always go, I don't feel any better. And so they were like, we'll go higher. We'll go higher. I was on an anti-anxiety, antidepressant, and a mood stabilizer at all times. I tried you name them, I've been on it within the 4 years. I was so heavily medicated, I was numb. You could have hit me and I was like, what? I didn't feel a thing. And so getting off of that, I quit smoking. I was a pack-a-day smoker. I never worked out a day in my life. I started going to the gym. I went paleo and I cut all the meds all the same day. And I broke up with the boyfriend I was dating. It was one of the worst. It was one of the worst times of my life. But for me, it's the same. I'm going through this crazy mold detox right now. I like to push myself to that level because I know if I could do it, how much stronger I become. So cutting everything instead of like stair stepping, I'm like, no, throw me into the lion's den. Let me fight. It allowed me. I definitely, there was a stigma of like, oh, is there something wrong with me that I need medication? No, I believe that if it's right for a lot of people, I have so many people that are on it that feel amazing. But unfortunately, it's not a one size fits all. And we know that. And I think it's not a Band-Aid and it's not a get out of jail free card and it's not a quick fix. It's in addition to it's a modality like everything else. I have a gene mutation. I don't need more serotonin. It actually made it worse once I started to understand what the fuck I was dealing with. That's why it didn't work for me. But for people that it does, all power to you. But I would say this, if you tried it, it doesn't work and you feel, then maybe explore that there could be something else at bay. Anxiety does not need to be a pill takes care of it. We can learn other modalities to heal our anxiety, like doing trauma work and understanding where we learned it from.
And that's probably the last thing I'll say in the conversation is just really commending the work that you're doing, because you hate to think about somebody who thinks that, you know, their last hope is attached to conventional medicine. And so, you know, I just really inspired by the work that you're doing, because I think you're showing that there's a longer term, deeper rooted solution to be had. And yeah, it's a harder road and journey, but you know, it stems from people like you who are going out there and helping raise that sort of education. So thanks for that, Sabrina.
Thanks, Mike.
I mean, I did the same thing. I wasn't even prescribed. I mean, I was taking Adderall just to stay up, chronically fatigued, couldn't sleep. So then I got prescribed Ambien because I'm like, I can't sleep. And here I am, and I was on autopilot. So it's like I didn't even realize. I thought this was just it. I'm just a tired person. I'm always tired. I can't sleep. Never been able to sleep well. And now I don't do any of that stuff. And I wake up filled with energy at 5 a.m. I love it, And so it's a true testament to you and the work you're doing, because I know it's not easy, and I know it takes a lot of effort. To wrap this up, Sabrina, what are you most proud of?
Oh, I love that question. I think what I'm most proud of is creating a community of people that feel a lot less alone. Because I know for me, like I felt like I just intrinsically, I was fucked up. There's something wrong with me. And that I was on this island. I really genuinely believe no one else experienced what I experienced. And I could not be prouder of creating a space where it's like, it's totally okay to have anxiety. That doesn't define who you are. Now let's get to work. And so I think it just makes me kind of beam from ear to ear that I can show my little me that what we went through, the pain doesn't have to be turned into anything besides purpose. And to me, that's just like something, I think that's why I wake up every day, is because I get to show little me that like I'm going to lead her in the right direction, as well as anybody else that needs to go with us.
Wow. I love that. Sabrina Zohar, everybody. Sabrina, thank you.
Thanks, guys.